the Desert Sanctuary with Karl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion, or we want to be contemplative, or simply ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to welcome you to our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that resonate with our fellow friends and seekers here in the desert.
Our hope is that you will find life for your body, soul, and spirit.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand, and I'm here with Karl Forehand. And it's just the two of us tonight, and we're going to have another chat kind of about, I don't know, things we've been thinking about lately about the church. So I think our topic tonight is volunteer labor in the church. And I'll be honest, when we were in church, I never thought about it in this way, that all the hours that we spent up there were like volunteer. And not only that, but we were trying to get congregants to volunteer tons of their time as well.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about it too much, but we made reference in a couple of last podcasts that it's a weird thing, you know, where somebody comes and pays so that they can volunteer.
Right. So you pay your tithe, right?
Right.
Like 10% of your income, supposedly. But, you know, in addition to that, you're also asked to serve in a myriad of ways without any type of compensation. But I suppose churches might argue that, you know, you're serving the Lord, so there's your compensation. I don't know. But then that kind of leads to, I'm going to go off on a rabbit trail before we even start. But then that leads to, you know, well, does God, you know, do I have to do these things in order for God to approve of me or find me worthy? Anyway, I'm interested to get into this conversation, and I may have just taken us into the weeds and things you might not have even thought about talking about, but I don't know. Anyway.
So that does lead into the story. So it's the snow scooping story. When I was a deacon, so this would have been in our adult life, you know, we were starting to have kids. JD was born. We were going to a church that I won't mention, but Jim and I, not Gemini.
Not Gemini.
Jim and I were deacons, young deacons at the church, and there came, as will happen in Omaha, Nebraska, occasionally, a snowmageddon, right?
Yeah,
and it's a foot of snow and it's drifting, and so it's completely covered our medium to small size parking lot. And there's the pastor, you know, lets us know that we need to do something about the snow. Maybe the deacons could take care of it. And I don't, you know, he was busy, I guess, on Saturday. And so then we went out trying to figure out what to do with this. And no one, of course, you know, most churches have contracted it out or had somebody do it, or they have, you know, their own plans. Someone in the church has a truck with a blade on it, which is not that unusual in the Midwest. But our church didn't have a plan. So, you know, we had to scramble every time it snowed on Saturday or Friday, you know, and
because people had to come to church on Sunday.
Come to church. So, we were left with that dilemma. So Jim and I got out there and started shoveling snow. And, you know, when snow gets so deep, you know, it's just almost a nightmare to try to scoop it with hand shovels, because there's nowhere for the snow to go. You can't just push it across a 10-foot area. You know, you have to, you literally have to pick it up and throw it.
Yeah, I've done that here at our house.
Yeah.
Because we don't have a driveway. So in order for us to get our cars, you know, out of like our parking area, I have to shovel a path. Yeah.
It's hard work. A lot of people have heart attacks doing that.
I know.
So, but we were out there, and after a little while, we'd really only made tracks through it. You know, it kind of got the initial work done after a couple hours, and we were lamenting that no one was helping us You know, it was hard, and something else should have been done and all that, and getting really angry. And then we used that anger to just start furiously scooping
use
snow
it as fuel.
But what we were doing was funny, was we were saying, well, unto the Lord, or as unto the Lord, and using those phrases as well.
Were you just joking, or were you serious?
No, we were serious.
Oh,
we were. That this is, you know, our act of service. A lot of times what people say about volunteer labor, or they use, you know, I don't know. It's, you know, and somehow it's supposedly something we're offering that God's really proud of us. And so God must be really proud of Jim and Karl right now, because they're the only deacons out here shoveling snow. And so, I mean, it was late into the night when we finally get done, and it's really just to a level of, you'd need snow boots to come to church still. You know, there was still a lot of snow out there, and it was a little bit windy, so it was blowing around a little bit. So it wasn't great, but we go inside and we're kind of standing at the window looking back out at the parking lot and being really proud of ourselves. And about that time, we hear something, and we see a pickup with a blade on it comes through.
Oh my gosh.
and pushes the first swath out of the way. It was way easier for him because we had done that.
Well, yeah.
But he just finished it up, and we just hobbled out to our vehicles and made our way out, kind of unhappy. And then the next morning, we were sort of, you know, dropping hints to key people, that we had done all that work and didn't, you know. Then the guy comes in, but the head deacon stands up in church and says, want to thank, you know, Joe Jeffries for coming by and blading the church. And so we didn't get any credit for it.
And of course, if you even think, you know, man, that kind of hurts, I didn't get any credit, then the whole, you know, Christian narrative comes in, right? And you should have, you should do it for recognition. Right. You should expect recognition.
Yeah. And no one else was doing it at all. So, it was, you know, it was just one of those things that happens. And so there's some statistics I found on volunteering. It's really hard to separate volunteering in America from volunteering in the church. And so,
now, can I just say something before you give us these statistics? Because we don't want anybody getting the wrong idea. There isn't anything wrong with volunteering. Right. I mean, we all volunteer from time to time.
I think it can be overused, though.
Exactly.
Because, you know, you hear celebrities and things like that talk about giving back.
Right.
Almost like they should be guilty for making money or something. And so they're kind of guilted into giving back to where they came from. You know, like their community was always 100% behind them or something. But I mean, yeah, I definitely believe in helping others, doing things you don't get paid for, you know, helping your neighbor, helping your relatives, doing things like that.
But when it's tied to your worth or God's approval of you.
Yeah. And when it goes through church.
Yeah. I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, because there is so much attached to, you know, doing the work of the Lord. I know we were just laughing about that, but I mean, really that becomes this deep-seated shame issue, if you will. So, I mean, I just want to make that clarification, because we're not saying don't volunteer, don't ever volunteer, don't ever give of your time, because we all do. I mean, I do at my school. I get, you know, there's times I'm up there and I'm not getting paid for it. But my job and my worth and my, you know, how I feel about myself is not tied to that. anyway, just wanted to clarify.
So when you average all that out, Americans donate on average 52 hours a year.
Okay.
So every week, on average, they average an hour a week. Like your mom helps with pets and stuff.
Right.
She probably gives 5 or 6 hours, or I don't know how many hours, but she goes down there.
Travel time and stuff.
Yeah. She goes down there a couple of times a week. And so it's probably a pretty good average. The thing about churches and organizations is the 20-80 rule. So what they say, and it tends to kind of come out in the statistics too, that 20% of the people give 80% of the money, and 20% of the people in the church do 80% of the work.
I would agree with that.
So,
just in the churches we were in, we saw that very statistic.
So if you just came an hour early for church to do something to help out, that would probably be good, except that 80% of the people aren't doing anything.
And I think that number, 52 hours a year, I think that's low.
It probably is a little low.
Considering all the different things that are done in the church or services in the community that start at the church. I think that's low, but I get it. It's an average.
I think there's some things to take into account when you start talking about volunteering. You start talking about like mission trips and things like that. We hosted a mission trip in Big Lake when it was one of the hurricanes that hit New Orleans.
Hurricane Katrina, actually.
So we took a few of our kids. Let's teach them how to volunteer. We went down and worked on a church. But there's some things to think about when you think about that. If we... and for us, it was the Southern Baptist Convention was footing the bill. And so they would buy materials, and they get workers from all over the country to come to New Orleans and rebuild this church. So we had high schoolers drywalling. But here's the thing about that. That takes away from the local economy. The local contractors there can't rebuild that church. Now, imagine at that time they're probably swamped. So who knows? But that's one of the things it does. And if we go to Mexico and build a church, and everybody gives them free labor, then the people there and their economy suffers somewhat because we do that. So it's not always the best thing. And sometimes we get carried away with, if we're going to go do the work, then we're going to convert people to our brand of religion, and so on. So it gets into all, if we help you, we're going to proselytize you. And it just kind of sends the wrong message to me, for me. Anyway, I never could quite stomach that part of it.
And not only that, but like with mission trips, again, we paid to go give free labor.
That's right. We did.
It's just something to think about. I'm like, if that's what you want to do, like, I get it, but like, it's just interesting that
all the people that went on that mission trip with us were business owners, people that had money. The poor people couldn't go with us. And we had
I don't even know how we got
church.
The money to do it, to be honest.
Because we're the pastor gets a break usually on most of those things. So I don't remember exactly how that worked out, or how it was funded and so on. But anyway, that was our experience. And then from a site called Volunteering in America, it says basically that 60.7 million people volunteered 4.1 billion hours in the United States. So this is everything in the United States. And the sites I could find listed volunteer labor at $28 an hour. So that's what it comes out to, because some things are, semi-professional level stuff, or some things are just manual labor. So if $28 an hour for 4.1 billion hours is $114.8 billion dollars worth of volunteer labor. So what that tells me, and not that it's a given that it's abusive, but it could be.
Sure.
That is a lot of hours and a lot of money that corporations, churches, businesses, government entities, all of them saved that 114 billion because somebody did it for free.
Yeah.
And so, like we're saying, it's not always wrong, but it's prone to abuse, right?
Sure.
So that was kind of the next stage. Also, something I mentioned before, that poor people can't always do it, but you do, just like everybody else, expect a poor person that comes in the door to tithe and volunteer. We could pay them to clean the bathrooms or something.
Right. Give them a job.
Boost the economy, build a smaller building, reduce the pastor's cost of living some, and, employ some of those things like mowing the lawn and cleaning the bathrooms. All of our churches, we always had a cleaning schedule.
Right.
We got free cleaning.
Yep.
Of the church
members. Yep. Came in once a week.
2080 rule was definitely applied because it was
it was the same
a few people that did it all the time. And, maybe that made them happy. Maybe they got some fulfillment out of that. It's not a total either way. This is one thing that kind of worries me about the stats, was so many when I would try to Google, I kept trying to find out, is the church different than society? Because it kind of lumped the statistics together, and I was trying to find something to differentiate it. And a lot of the volunteer stuff I found was in private Christian schools. So I just want to give you a few examples here of some different statistics. So Rainier Christian Schools in Auburn, Washington, requires the family of the student donate 15 hours per semester per year, I think. Okay. Maybe per semester.
Yeah.
And in lieu of that, you can give $375. So just keep write a check.
I can't. Okay. That makes no sense in my head.
Yeah.
So, okay. Anyway.
I don't remember. No, it's $24 or $20 or whatever they're using.
Yeah. So you can either volunteer or you can pay us more money.
Right.
Okay.
And Christian schools almost always are heavy, or tuition based.
Oh,
so you're paying tuition anyway. It's kind of the same deal as church. Pay to come here, but also volunteer.
Yep.
And at a lot of these schools, it's required. One of the school, their statistics are what were staggering. They had 12,800 volunteer hours, and they even mentioned what that was worth. It was worth $358,400.
Oh, my goodness.
Unless I wrote something down wrong or didn't calculate right, those are the statistics that were on the page. And I didn't write down which school it was. Gilbert Christian in Gilbert, Arizona gives an award, and really all you get is a white card at graduation. That's like, outstanding volunteer or whatever.
You get a certificate, basically.
Yeah, some kind of certificate or card for 150. It was kind of graduated. If you got there when you were a senior, you didn't have to do as much. But if you were there in 9th grade and finished through your senior year,
4 years,
you needed to have 150 unpaid hours of volunteer time to qualify for the card. It's
like a certificate.
It's like a certificate you get at graduation.
Yeah. Okay. What did that do for you?
Well, I guess you could put on your resume, I'm an exceptional volunteer.
I guess. I do know some colleges look at
volunteer
community hours. Service and volunteer hours and stuff like that.
So Prince Avenue in Bogart, Georgia, requires 65 hours to graduate.
So some of these aren't even like a volunteer thing. They require it. So to me, that no longer sounds like volunteer work, which is a little, when I was
in seminary, they had what they called servant leader training. And so you had to show volunteer work.
Mm-hmm.
So I would use my church work and deacon work and stuff like that. And, those are required to graduate. That's part of your graduation is you have to be a servant leader and do that. What I wrote down was schools, like the church, most of these hours and the examples given are supporting the school or the church. They're not, most of those hours are not helping
the
homeless or so on. And even if they are, it's indirectly, it's going through the church. Mm-hmm. So the church is absorbing a lot of it. Right. So, but it's, most of it is helping the church. If you have a potluck and you have 1,500 members, you got to have a lot of volunteers to put on a potluck.
Right.
But that's not helping the homeless.
Mm-hmm.
It may provide one meal for somebody hungry in your church. Mm-hmm. But, it's not the same as, sponsoring a homeless ministry.
Right.
You're not going directly to that. You're going through the church. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the activities are just supporting the church, keeping the building in shape, keeping the lawn mowed, and all of those things. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
They have to have 10 people stand up to pray with people, after the service. Mm-hmm. And so on. So it's supporting the church or the school, not necessarily directly volunteering in a volunteer organization.
Yeah. So rather than, give that money to the church that says they're funneling it to the homeless shelter, just go volunteer at a homeless shelter. Yeah. I mean, if you want to volunteer,
Or when I wrote the blog that kind of contributed to this, I said, why not just stay at home mm-hmm. on Sunday and give your money to the
to whatever organization you choose. Right.
Watch the sermon online and give your money for charity to charity.
Yeah. 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 Well, I have a couple questions for you. So, so why, do we have to pay, or, when we say pay, we mean offering. So why do we need to do that? And we're still required to do most of the work or the mm-hmm. service. And I get a little anxiety just even asking that question, because I just remember always feeling like if I wasn't doing enough, I wasn't good enough. And if I wasn't doing enough, then God was upset with me. Mm-hmm. And just there's just so much, potential trauma that's just kind of twisted up in there. But, so anyway, that's my question. Why do we have to pay, and yet we're still required to do most of the work?
Yeah. So what you're saying is right. There's a lot of shame tied up in mm-hmm. it. And that's the way we get it to work, because you say, well, you're doing this for the Lord, and the Lord wants you to volunteer. And, so that's where the
Lord wants you to volunteer. Oh man, I wish I would have had critical thinking skills back then. So can you give me the piece of paper or the phone message that you got when he said that? Anyway.
So it goes back to what we wrote about in our books. We wrote about in our book, the big thing of God has a plan mm-hmm. and a purpose for your life.
Right.
Well, the number one thing that people say in church is, I don't know what God's plan is for my life, or I don't know what my purpose is. And so mm-hmm. when you come to that point, then it's real easy for you to get swept up mm-hmm. in the church's plan mm-hmm. and purpose, mm-hmm. which is usually the main pastor's mm-hmm. plan and purpose,
or the organization, or the people higher than
the organization's plan,
than the pastor.
And so, how they make it work is with that guilt, that shame. Mm-hmm. You want us to have a good sound system, don't you? You want us to, the trains to keep rolling.
Well, we don't want people in our community to go hungry, do you?
Right. And so, it all works through guilt and shame and so on. But then the reason we have to pay and work is because 70%, at least, someone else told me 85% this week, but the stats I've seen say 70% at least goes to buildings, keeping buildings up, and paying the salaries of the people that work there, especially that main pastor. Even if you have a smaller church, it still works that way,
right?
You know, and even if you let's just say we started a church in our house, you know, and we said, well, as a side thing, we'll take up an offering, we'll give it to charity, right? Well, if we have any success at all, you know, let's say we had 10 people and it doubled, we're going to have a place to meet. We're going to have to rent a place to, maybe it's only $25 a week, but then that money's already going to the building. Then as you progress in that church, then you got to buy land, you got to buy a building, you got to have a building campaign. And so we need almost all that money to keep the trains running, even if it's a small thing.
Right.
You know, even if it's a small church.
Yeah. So there's a church in our community, and there's one as we drive south of our community. The one that we drive south of our community is definitely being refurbished on the outside. And we had a church here in town that, you know, also. So, you know, I can hear people just say, well, that's why they have building funds. You know, I'm sure that they're not, you know, you can speak to that because you were a pastor and you dealt with church budgets and stuff like that. But, you know, like fixing up the church, what's wrong with that? You know, it's a way to bring people in. I'm being sarcastic, obviously, but, you know, are people just saying like, well, that's why we have a building fund? Because then, you know, our missions and our, you know, helping the homeless and all the other good things we do with our volunteer labor, you know, comes from this pile of money, but not our, you know, but it bothers me when I go by, you know, like I did today. I had to travel to St. Joe, and it was like just looking at that church that's like getting new siding and getting spruced up basically, you know, and I'm just like, that's money that if you didn't have to maintain your building, that's money you could be, you know, giving to people that truly need it. Maybe there are people in your community that need new siding on their house, you know, because their house isn't gonna be fit for the winter. I mean, I don't know.
I'd like somebody to paint our house.
Right. Or we have like some cracks and stuff like that. Those are things, you know, I mean, so I can fix, but
these rural areas where we live, at one time, you know, when everybody had 80 acres and a mule or whatever,
right?
You know, when they could survive on 80 acres, there was a ton of people that farmed, had, you know, small farms that could maintain them, and a lot of them went to church. And some of these churches, you know, around here had 200 people, and now they have 20.
Right.
You know, I'm just guessing, you know, maybe the other, you know, the one that has 50 says we have way more than 20, but they have big buildings still that they have to maintain. Like the church you're talking about doesn't probably fill that church. You know, there's just tons of classrooms. The church next door to us has a lot of classroom space and so on from the past, but they don't fill that. They still have to keep shingles on it and maintain it and heat it and all that. And the money just tends to go for those things.
Right.
You know, you pay as much as you can for a pastor because you want quote unquote good one, you know, and you pay as much staff as you can to handle everything, you know, because sometimes people don't volunteer. But then none of them run without volunteer labor.
Right.
You know, unless they're really small. And you can get your family to do all the work, you know.
Right.
So that's my take on that.
All right. So why do like pastors and staff demand personal family time, but expect us to serve during our free time?
Yeah, this is the thing I never really understood. And it was basically my frustration with pastors, even when I was a pastor, because I was a bivocational pastor for 2 of the 3 churches we pastored.
Right.
You know, the second 2 were both, I was working a full-time job. You know, there may have been one time when I was working 2 jobs, but mostly working a job and then writing sermons at night, doing funerals on my day off. I'd take a day off.
Yeah.
And the weekend was my weekend from work. So it was always my free time. And it really irritates me to call, a slightly larger church that has 2 or 3 pastors and try to talk to the associate pastor and him say, well, this is my family time.
Right.
But they are expecting all of those other people that also work 40 to 50 hours a week like they do, and I'm not saying that pastors don't work, because I know they do.
Right.
They put in some hours, but all of us are doing our service as unto the Lord on our free time.
Right.
And I was, even as a pastor, doing that. So maybe I had a little more compassion for people, but you expect them, it's that theologian's kind of pride, I think. Well, I'm going to go home and, I'm going to work on the message on Thursday on my office hours. And then I'm going to go home on the weekend and get ready, so don't call me while you guys are all preparing, and then on the other hand, then there's some of those associate pastors that are just work like dogs. They don't make anywhere near what the senior pastor makes. So there's a lot of problems in there.
Yeah.
It's the guy at the top makes the most money. It's, he's not necessarily volunteering, or she's not necessarily volunteering like everybody else. I remember vividly, working at a boys' home in St. Joe, and the pastor showing up at the later hours of the day when most of the work's done to get pictures taken and be there, to thank all the people, but not necessarily do the work.
Yeah, the work. Yeah. That makes me think, like, it's okay for, senior pastors, whatever. It's okay for them to set those boundaries, like, well, this is my family time, but it's not necessarily okay. Or there's some guilt and shame if a congregant tries to set those boundaries.
One of the bigger Facebook groups the other day, when I had a little bit of run-in with them, I was just it's a group of 5,000 to 7,000 or something, so somewhere in there. So it's a bigger group. But one of the moderators, when I posted a message that says, I'm just going to go ahead and leave this group, and just posted that, came, out of the group and scolded me because they had posted a message that the moderators were taking a break because of the mental health break or something, because there's kind of a controversy in there. And so I'm like, it's not just in churches, not just pastors. Yeah. It's just this idea that we're special, and you should be honored to do the work for us,
Right. Right. Yeah. So what qualifies some people in the church to direct the work and others to do it? Because, there's people that will say, these are the things that need to be done. And, when we visited the church across the street, like right after, it was before we decided we weren't going to go to church anymore and really started our deconstruction. I mean, it was like the second Sunday that we visited, somebody came up to me and was like, so do you play handbells? It's like, they were already ready to give me a job, They were ready to, I was just like, yeah, I've done it before, but no, thank you, anyway, but
I think when you do anything, you need leadership. You need, you need somebody to direct traffic,
organize,
do that. A lot of times it's not the pastor or the staff that's good at that. I mean, going to seminary doesn't mean that you're a good leader. Being a good speaker on stage doesn't mean that you're a good leader. It also doesn't mean you're a counselor or a therapist, just because you can speak well and you're pretty it doesn't necessarily qualify you for that. So we have to have leadership. And that was my question that I wrote. So I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but it's like I said, there's double standards sometimes. There's we'll lead and tell you how to do it, and I run into a conflict with that because, like with this theology conference, all of these people, because we're theologians, because we have an opinion on the scriptures and we went to school for that, then we want you to come hear us speak. They may not be qualified to speak, but the better speakers probably are the ones there. And we want you to pay us, by the way, to do that. And see, that's part of what I'm contemplating is, why did we need theologians in the first place? If you're going to follow Jesus, his thing was pretty simple. Love your neighbor, treat people like you want to be treated, go inside, those kind of things. It's real simple stuff. And theologians are the ones that have made it complicated, and they're the ones cleaning up the messes of their predecessors. Right. But it doesn't necessarily make them good leaders just because they're able to study scriptures and do word studies and things like that, and come up with theories and ideas on how to understand God. Doesn't necessarily make them a good leader. Right. So that's very true. And we've seen disasters. People like Mark Driscoll, who is really just an asshole. He wasn't a good leader. He, just by force developed a big church, but destroyed thousands and thousands of lives. And
Hillsong too, and all that stuff. Like, we've seen it.
And we got a long history of just the church making messes and starting wars and things like that. So just because it's always been that way doesn't mean it should be. Right. And so, I think both of us agree, volunteerism can be good, in the right context.
I just think like the whole, premise of the word volunteer means that you get to decide if that's something you want to do or not. And like I've said before, when you start bringing shame and guilt into it, I just don't feel like it's volunteering anymore. I feel like it's coercion. Like you said, it's kind of emotionally forcing people to do something. Otherwise they're crappy people, and that's just not true.
We've said before, if the church across the street has 100 people, then it has $100,000 budget. And, how much loving your neighbor could you do with that? Right. If we just get it focused in the right way,
But that's the other thing. Then we, like so many other things about the church, then we get into these fights inside the walls of the church because I think we should, give money to suicide prevention for LGBTQ youth. And, no, we can't support that, or maybe we should give it to a crisis pregnancy for unwed mothers, teenage pregnancies. Oh no, if we support that, then people are going to think that we condone, sex outside of marriage. And so like, I mean, that goes back to what you said. It's like, if that's what you want to give your money to, you don't need to go to a church to do that.
People used to always ask me as a pastor, if I give money to focus on the family, which, at that time was okay for me, a long time ago.
Long time ago.
But they would say, if I give, money to other organizations, do I still have to tithe? And I said, I remember reasoning it out in my mind and thinking, well, I want you to bring it through the church so that we can apply God's wisdom to it or something.
Gosh.
Ridiculous like that, and it's just.
I know, but at the time.
That was the mindset.
Right.
That's what we thought.
Oh, man.
It needs, bring it into the storehouse. That's from the Bible.
That's from the Bible.
So bring it into the storehouse so that people can be taken care of. And we, I think we were fortunate to be in churches that gave a lot away and things like that.
And we're not saying that churches don't do good things.
Right.
But anyway.
It's terribly inefficient. And sometimes it's taxing on people, and their guilt and their shame causes them to think, well, if I could just give more, if I could just do more, if I could just, be at church more often and do more. And then sometimes it ruins other areas.
There's the whole thing of, well, if you give, then, it will be returned to you tenfold. Not sure that ever happened to us. Pretty sure it didn't.
Yeah, so we might have imagined that it did a couple of times, but that was.
But I mean, but then it gets kind of twisted too. It's like, well, it doesn't always have to be money that comes back at you tenfold. Okay. Anyway, rabbit trails. So why does God need a huge building or an expensive staff and tons of already tired people to do his work? I mean, he's God after all.
I don't think he does. Especially not in the 21st century.
Yeah.
When we were living on the prairie, and we needed a place for the community to gather. We had simple buildings, a simple gathering place. It might have been helpful. I think some Black churches would argue, during the civil rights movement, especially they needed that community place and so on, but everything can get excessive and everything. We don't.
Yeah.
I don't think we do, especially not now. The way the internet's matured, we get information. We can get, if our pastor wants to preach to us, he could do it from his home study. We could watch it on YouTube. It's not that important to be there. Especially in a huge auditorium that costs lots of money to maintain.
Right.
Just doesn't make any sense.
Right. So, in your opinion, does it sound like brainwashing when someone convinces us to do all the work to fulfill their vision?
Yeah.
I mean, would you consider it like brainwashing? What do you think?
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
And doesn't it sound like brainwashing when someone convinces us to do all the work to fulfill their vision? Yeah. That it does to me.
Yeah. And the way they convince, though, I mean, that goes back to the whole shame and the guilt and, well, you're not worthy if you don't. And like, I feel like that borders on emotional abuse, So, and if emotional abuse is a type of brainwashing, then I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why does the lead pastor? Oh, that's a good question. Why does the lead pastor get to go on expensive trips while their associate pastors and their congregation hold down the fort? Yeah.
The show's got to go on.
We've been at churches where it's just like, the pastor and pastor's wife are going on some pretty extravagant. And sometimes, I mean, there again, it's like, well, we're going to commune with God when we go there. So,
and so we went to a church that had what they call G3 groups, and they would, those are supposed to be people that are at your same station in life. So
I called bullshit on that from the time those things started, even though we participated in it.
Yeah.
Because I'm telling you, I'll tell you how it was. It wasn't the people that were in the same station of life as you. It was basically, what do you call it? Like a clique. I mean, all the rich people were together, I mean, it was so obvious. It was just so obvious.
Yeah. And we knew people that came into the church that, maybe they had some experience in leadership and so, or whatever, just like in the Baptist church, it was always the lawyer, the doctor that came to your church, and immediately they're in positions of leadership. They're in, so on. And so these groups would group together, they at this church, they went on vacations together.
Yep. Yeah. Like going to like Key Largo and really nice vacations
together. And
people probably are thinking we're just jealous because we didn't get, we never did that. No, but it's true though. I mean,
so we're really just mimicking capitalism and corporate America. It's the same thing
for sure.
Whoever's at the top deserves that, and even if they're not paying them enough to be wealthy, sometimes the wealthy people in the church want them to have that, and so they give it to them. They get special treatment, but that still goes back to volunteering, and somehow it's again like just the people on the assembly line doing all the work. The people at the top take all the vacations and do all of that. There's disparity.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, if we think about it, wouldn't we be disappointed in a charity that spends 70% of its donations on the building and staff? I mean, that's what the church does.
There was a big movement recently, in the church, kind of condemning some of the outside organizations. I know that our denomination, the Southern Baptists, always disparage any parachurch organization like Campus Crusade or whatever. But they also occasionally would question these volunteer organizations that use too much of their money, for their founder. Right. And the thing about it is that was the way the church was operating too, that most of the money goes to the building and the salaries, and most of the salary goes to that one top person or the top few people.
Yeah.
We've always just noticed there's an inner circle,
for sure.
There's a clique, like you said, and it never works out fairly for the, maybe we welcome and love, bomb the single mom,
right?
Give her a nursery, she can put her kids in, but again, she's going to be volunteering. She's not going to be going on the mission trips, and she's not going to be going on the great vacation. She's going to be there at the church, cleaning the church, and paying her tithe. And hopefully the Lord will bless her enough to serve. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So you're sighing some, and like you've said, we don't want to paint the picture that we're just coming down really, really hard on all that, because there is some good work that slides through there, but there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of things that go to the wrong things. I don't know any better way to say that. It just doesn't work out for people, especially people with trauma, people that are poor, etc.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I think like we're not doing this podcast to like, I don't know what the word is, just come down super hard on the church or anything like that. But kind of like with a lot of things we talk about, it's like we just need to take a different look at it, reevaluate it, and be honest about our evaluation of it. So well, good stuff.
Sure. So we're recording on my new setup here in the office.
Lovely.
I've finally removed the computer that we've written all our books on.
Sad.
It's falling apart, and it's done its service to the Lord.
Oh my gosh. You've got to stop saying that.
And but now we got a computer that's not the greatest computer in the world, but we also have a cheap big monitor off to the side where we can read notes. So it might change our podcasting life forever.
There you go. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Who knows? We want to thank you guys for tuning in, as always. be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary.
Remember, all that wander in the desert are not lost. We hope that you know
you are seen,
you are heard,
and you are loved.